Hi, good evening, everyone. It's really a great pleasure to welcome you all. My name is Anissa Daoudi. I'm a linguist and translation studies at the University of Birmingham. I feel very privileged to host our last session of the series which I organized called Transnational Feminist Translation. I'm very happy to say that the series has enabled me to engage in conversation with renowned scholars in translation studies, in literature, in comparative literature, and in many other fields. The series is organized as part of our Arabic studies sessions, or Arabic studies section, sorry, and it's also part of the Translation Studies Research Forum at the University of Birmingham. The session also comes under the research stream called the Forgil Link, run by my colleague Bernie Seb. For those who were not here with us in the last 4 weeks, we had our inaugural lecture by Professor Louise von Floto, which was followed by 3 more sessions by Dr. Olga Castro, by another one by Dr. Ruth Abu Rashid, and today by Dr. Lamia Benyoussef. Again, the event is another session of transnational nature par excellence. With us today, those who are joining us today are postgraduate students as well from the Arab region and from other countries. From the Arab region, we have scholars and students from Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria, and we also are so lucky to have also some scholars following us from Latin America and from Asia. What makes this session as transnational is really our shared belief that, and our shared interest in other cultures and in languages and in feminists. We really would like to connect with the feminist movements around the world, particularly from the global south. This last session is very special, as we have the honor of hosting Professor Ronakld Judy, a professor of comparative literature at the University of Pittsburgh, US, and we're very lucky to have him today as respondent to Dr. Lamia, and we're very lucky because it's very rare to find scholars who specialize in classical Arabic, in Islamic studies, as well as be an expert in on North Africa, particularly Tunisia, as well as someone who has interest and who has also expertise in literary theory and in also music, Arabic and American literature. In fact, we're very lucky to have this combination, because the topic that we're going to talk about is really mixes all of these disciplines together. We also have, I'm also happy to, we have also scholars from the US joining us, Dr. Douja Mamlouk, and a few other scholars. I will now say a few words about our guest, our distinguished guest, Dr. Lamia Benyoussef, and I'll be very brief, what I usually do is I'll just say briefly a thing or two, and then please do Google her, and you will find for yourself what her publications and so on. So Dr. Lamia Benyoussef is an associate professor of Arabic studies and chair of the Department of Foreign Languages at Birmingham Southern College in Alabama, USA. She holds a BA in English from l'École Normale Supérieure of Sousse in Tunisia, and an MA and a PhD in English from Michigan State University. Her research interests are World War II in North Africa, the post-colonial Maghreb, gender studies, foreign language pedagogy, and translation studies. Her publication includes an article, "A Year of Typhus, Operation Torch Through the Eyes of Tunisian Women," or how to make the Holocaust an Arab story. And this is, you'll find this in the International Journal of Francophone Studies. And I particularly looked at this one because of special interest to my research on Algeria. So, as I said, you'll Google you will Google Dr. Lamia Benyoussef, and you'll find for yourselves her publications. This title, today's title, is "My Long Journey into Translating Olfa Youssef's Perplexity of Muslim Women: Causes, Evolution, and Future Directions in North African Intersectional Feminist Translation." I will just I selected what something that Dr. Douja Mamlouk has described her book. The book is, I read the book when it was first published in Arabic. I read the book by Olfa Youssef, حيرة امرأة مسلمة عفوا, and then when I read, it was kind of rereading and again questioning and again really engaging with so many things that are very close to heart and very close to my research and very close to what I basically question all the time. And I go back to the description by Dr. Douja Mamlouk. She says it's a provocative, insightful, and rigorous best, and these are best describe Lamia Benyoussef's books. And I found it really insightful and really provocative at the same time. And I'm not going to say much about this, and I will pass over to Lamia, and then after that, please write your questions and in the chat, and we will answer them afterwards. So the floor is yours, Dr. Lamia.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Anissa, for organizing this lecture series. What a treat. I'm really honored and humbled by your invitation to participate in this forum on international feminist studies. This has been quite a learning experience for me. And I would like to thank Dr. Olga Castro and Dr. Ruth Abu Rashid for the outstanding presentations and a scholarship that I was just introduced to in the last month. I extend my thanks to Dr. Ronakld Judy for the academic exchange we had and the articles he sent me. For those of you who do not know me, I'm a latecomer in translation studies. It is my teaching philosophy and interest in gender studies that slowly introduced me to feminist translation studies. I will divide my talk into 3 sections today. The first is about how I came into translation studies, why I decided to translate this book in particular, and then the evolution of my interest into feminist translation studies, and I will, discuss future directions in intersectional feminist translation studies, in particular in the case of the Maghreb, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. First of all, the causes. My first goal of the translation was to find for the young gay Muslims who are struggling with their sexuality in the non-Arabic speaking world, a home inside the house of Islam. Having lived and taught in the Deep South for almost 2 decades now, I saw the struggle of my Muslim gay students with the double pain of Islamophobia and homophobia. I also bore witness to the pain of my Christian gay students in their families, schools, and churches during office hours or in their essays. I looked for translated Arabic texts to create an inclusive classroom environment, but there were none. All textbooks translated into English taught my Muslim students that homosexuality was a sin and that they would burn in hell. Although LGBT activism itself originated in the West, Youssef's new interpretation of homosexuality in the Quran has allowed many young gay Tunisians to organize, especially after 2011, and create Shams, the first LGBT advocacy group in the country, which is now leading the battle to repeal Article 230, criminalizing homosexuality. Instead of the theory of the hudud or clear-cut frontiers of the sexes, which informs Abdel Wahab Bouhdiba's reading of sexuality in Islam, this is the book that has been translated into English. Youssef wonders whether the fluidity of sexual identity in the Quran is not within the individual himself, okay? She uses this verse from the walls, and why wouldn't the most righteous among you is the noblest in the sight of God. God is all omniscient and knowing. Avoiding the assertions previously provided by male scholars, she wonders, and why wouldn't the Quran, in asserting that mankind is created from a male and a female, be pointing to sexual, biological, and psychological fluidity and duality that distinguishes every human being, unquote. It is this inclusive reading, interpretation, or translation of the Quran into modern Arabic and also into modern times that convinced me of the need to translate this book into English. The second cause is, I would like to describe it as veilology, or the endless and empty discourse of the veil in the US. As Dr. Olga Castro stated in her lecture, migration plays a key role in feminist translation studies. Post 9/11, I felt I was constantly being erased by all three parties: the Christian conservative right, the secular liberal left, and the patriarchal Tunisian scholars in the US, or sometimes I see them also writing in the UK. While the first reproduce the French colonial rhetoric that the veil is the symbol of female oppression in Islam, in the discourse of the liberal left after 9/11, the veil and even the burqa were miraculously reconstructed as the symbol of US multiculturalism and tolerance towards Muslim minorities, in particular women. The discussions always revolved around the veil, where, in my opinion, it is a Eurocentric visual icon that was a foreign Iranian import in the Tunisia I grew up with in the 1970s and 80s. After the Arab Spring, American liberal feminists launched a novel crusade to liberate grassroots Arabophone Muslim women in Tunisia, those who wear the veil, from the tyranny of secular Francophone elite Tunisian women who admire France and Ben Ali. In this new rescue fantasy, liberal Anglophone white women are saving poor brown women from secular bourgeois brown women. Protecting, ironically, the male privilege of brown men, they dismiss Tunisian women's call for gender equality in inheritance as a bourgeois Francophone endeavor that had nothing to do with the real problems of Tunisian people, which is, of course, the same argument that Tunisian male politicians use to deny women equal citizenship. Neither the right to education nor my economic opportunities matters to my American feminist sisters, who dismissed my fight against institutional poverty as a capitalist bourgeois endeavor. In an ideal world, said one of my intersectionist feminist friends, she told me that there should be no property at all. The fight now is for democracy, not the right to property, as if my right for economic justice was not part of the democratization process. I can only wonder if American women's struggle for equal pay for equal work could be called a capitalist bourgeois endeavor under the same liberal fatwa. The translation of Youssef's scholarship on inheritance is important because it is a political intervention on behalf of the hundreds of millions of Muslim women who are more suffering from institutional poverty than the wearing or not wearing of the veil. For me, the veil is a non-issue. And that's why I just call it now veilology. The third course is what I notice is hijacking of intersectional feminist studies to serve an Islamocentric Anglophone center. The portrait of Youssef challenges the simplistic division in the Anglophone press and even academia that the divide in Tunisia in the post-revolution is between the Francophone secular educated elite who are admirers of France and the Arabophone poor masses who are attached to their Arabo-Islamic heritage. Youssef has studied in Tunisia. She went to Tunisian schools, grad schools. She went neither to Harvard, Duke, Oxford, Columbia, nor Cambridge, nor Cornell, like those who accuse her of elitism. Yet, neither her Arabic education nor expertise in Islamic studies has prevented her from defending the principle of secularism or the values of the Republic. The US liberal dichotomy between the secular Francophone elites and the Arabophone masses, if it reveals anything, it is the rise of a new school of liberal Orientalism in which neither the Arab language nor the Arab mind, on account of some undiagnosed cultural or genetic incompatibility, is capable of producing secular thought. Arab secular scholars are seen either as minions of France or Ben Ali, because Youssef is a Muslim feminist reformer who functions within a Franco-Arabic Islamic secular paradigm that is indebted both to Averroes and Descartes. Monica Marx, for example, doesn't even include her when she speaks about Tunisian Muslim feminists. In addition, what does the word even bourgeois academic elite mean when the salary of a full professor in Tunisia is between $800 and $1,000, which is less than my salary when I was a teaching assistant in Michigan State? So we need to question, all of that. What does it mean to be a bourgeois academic in Tunisia, especially that life there is as expensive as it is in the US? If the portrait of Youssef, the urban admirer of both Arabic and French philosophy like Razès, Avicenna, Descartes, Lacan, Ibn Arabi proves anything, it is not that she was conniving with Ben Ali against her Muslim sister who wears the veil. It just shows the quality of the secular education that exists in Tunisia and the Bourguiba in both Arabic and French. Youssef has risen from the same aristocracy of the 70s and 80s that enabled Tunisian male and female students of her generation to break social class ceiling, join the competitive Grande École in France, and participate even in the big universities in the United States. My fourth reason for translating is subverting the production of knowledge about the Middle East in US academia. Besides being, of course, a brilliant scholar, Olfa Youssef had the advantage of working in her native country, an unrecognized privilege from the perspective of North African women in the diaspora like me, who, although are teaching in American universities, are often offered teaching positions which require them to serve as native informants rather than research positions which would enable them to be producers of knowledge about Islam and the Middle East. Youssef's success derives not from her collaboration with Ben Ali, as many argues, but from a combination of positive factors, from the fact that she's a middle-class Muslim woman born to educated parents, she's the product of the Bourguiba secular school system, and also because she is teaching in Tunisia, which makes her escape the academic house of terrorology and veilology. I move now to the second part of my talk, which is how I developed this interest in translation studies. It took me about 3 years to find a publisher. My frustration with dozens of rejections led me to reflect upon the politics of translation. I shared the proposal with senior colleagues, and they reassured me that there was nothing wrong with the proposal, just to keep on sending it to different people. So finally, I met an editor from Lexington Books in ALA conference 2016, I think, and she asked me to send her the manuscript. I did send it, and it was, and I'm happy it was accepted. And even though I sent the manuscript to that same press 2 years earlier, but they didn't accept it. So it's, academic presses, they change their plans every 2-3 years. You just keep, even my advice is that you keep sending it again and again. You never know what the chance. I learned during this process also is that when they sent me the papers to check for the last time, when they sent me I was waiting for the comment of the external reviewers. And then all of a sudden I was told, no, we don't need the comment of the external reviewers. The book has already proved its merit in Arabic. And then I was really shocked. My work as a translator, is what your job, the function of the peer reviewers is to check the validity of my translation, my work, not the worth of the book in Arabic. So I had to go see a lawyer, and she advised me to get a letter from the provost to explain the importance of the peer review process in the career of a faculty. And luckily, Lexington Books, the editors were very understanding, and they postponed the book production by 5 months until we heard back from the external reviewers. So I discovered during this process that only in 2011, the MLA recognized that anonymously peer-reviewed scholarship was considered scholarship, that a tenure track faculty could use to get tenure. So I don't know what the assumption was, that it was, I don't know, it wasn't even considered scholarship before 2011. I transformed my frustration into a paper about the challenge of translating Muslim women academics while waiting, of course, for a publisher. Frustration pushed me to discover feminist translation studies. My discovery of Else Ribeiro Vieira's Poetics of Transcreation, Susan Basnett and André Lefebvre's rapprochement between cultural studies, translation studies, and globalization, and Mona Baker's scholarship on translating dissent in the Egyptian Revolution allowed me to understand and tease out the various mechanisms through which Youssef's work has been silenced in the Anglophone world, and the various challenges I encountered translating her work not only from Arabic to English, but also from Quranic Arabic to modern standard Arabic. For every act of reading or interpreting a text, sacred or otherwise, is in itself an act of translation, and this within any language, not just Arabic. I would like to argue also, one of the things I found out is that translation in the field of Islamic studies is a patriarchal enterprise. When I offered in summer 2015 to submit my translation proposal to the National Center for Translation in Tunisia, I was told that the editorial board would never approve it, and I was advised to translate instead Tahar al-Haddad's 1930 book, Muslim Women in Law and Society. In the Tunisia of the post-revolution, the fathers of Tunisian feminism seem to be more worthy of translation than their daughters. This gender bias in deciding who gets to be the icon of the country's feminism abroad dominates in both the East and the West, turning some areas of the translation field into a patriarchal discursive exchange between Western and Eastern men, in which Muslim women remain the objects, but rarely the agents of discussion. Because al-Haddad is held to be one of the fathers of Tunisian feminism, and because President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali used the myth of Tunisia's women liberation as a tool to hush up criticism of his repressive regime abroad. Hosni and Newman's translation of Al-Haddad's book won the 2008 World Award of the President of the Republic of Tunisia for Islamic Studies. Obviously, the official I met in Tunisia in 2015 did not know even that the book has already been translated into English. In the particular context of Tunisia, only the scholarly work of Abdel Wahab Bouhdiba, Fathi Ben Slema, and Abdel Wahab Medeb, all three of them men, have been translated into English from the French by major Western presses. Western presses do translate novels and poetry by Arab and Muslim women writers, but they seem to be reluctant to publish their literary criticism and religious commentaries, perhaps assuming that Muslim men are more knowledgeable about Islam than the women who share their faith. Thus, as any other colonial or post-colonial text, translation from Arabic is related to a pre-inscribed territory within the cartography of Anglophone academia that is dominated by men. Translation from Arabic is to be understood as a new space for political intervention at odds with well-established and dominant discursive paradigms of the type discussed by Said. To sell translation to an academic press, the translator has to mimic colonial scholarship on North Africa to make the proposal marketable without really being a native informant. To do so, the translator has to concurrently engage and disengage in the dominant discourses of empire and the oppressive structures of Eastern and Western patriarchy. To be a successful act of political intervention, the translator both performs and unperforms the role of the native informant. The she translator is a sort of a trickster who wraps herself in the narrative that Western academy expects to hear, such as the pre-narrated space of the Muslim woman, marriage in Islam, and homosexuality in Islam, only to surprise the reader with a multiplicity of meanings in the Quran that are rarely acknowledged and are often skipped, East and West, in discussions of Islam. In ancient times, messengers, translators were killed when they brought bad news. Modern times, messengers, translators endure being modestly paid for interrupting state monopoly of the discursive production of Islam in the Anglophone world. I did not make a dime translating Olfa Youssef's work. Even with the publication of the English translation, only young South Asian women scholars actually reviewed the book and welcomed the translation as an important contribution to feminist Islamic studies. The experts on the Muslim mind and the 2011 Tunisian revolution understandably chose to ignore it. In this third millennium, and despite all the focus on Islam and Muslim women in the Anglophone press, neither Routledge, Harvard University Press, Arkansas University Press, Fordham University Press, Texas University Press, Syracuse University Press, Al-Saqi Books, Oxford University Press, the feminists, all of them, not a single one translated a book about written by Muslim women in the field of Islamic studies between 2000 and 2018 when I wrote this paper. Even in women's novels, little has been translated above what Lila Abu Lord called saving Muslim women's memoir. Okay, going skip. Okay, I'm going to skip to the third section, which is future directions or future direction in North African intersectional feminist translation studies. I would like to speak about race. I would like to raise the issue of translating race across different languages and different imperial formations, not just and I'm looking also at French as an imperial, for English as an imperial, and also Arabic. It was once upon a time an imperial formation. The word Negro, Black, or the N-word have been translated differently across languages by different translators. If race is a construct, should we translate it with the different philosophies of race across cultures? If race is a biological function, then how does it intersect with kinship and wealth inequality? The concept of race as it's being used today by Tunisian writers, addressing in particular an Anglophone audience, is Eurocentric and does not reflect the complexity and usage of this word in the Arabic language, especially in Tunisia. In the case of the Tunisian dialect, we freely use the word al-unsuriya, racism, to mean different things. Racism on the basis of race, racism on the basis of gender, racism on the basis of social class, and racism on the basis of religion against the blue people, as seen in the new, or sometimes we have this word hugra, okay? The hugra, it is racism, it is disdain, it is disrespect, it is exclusion. And more recently, we have the new terminology, the behind the road signs people. In other words, any feeling of marginalization, discrimination, and social injustice is called racism. It is not based on the 19th century European biological reading of race. While I would say Tunisian racial slurs against Blacks, like kahlouche, blackie, or usif, which means servant or Black person who was, sorry, it still means servitude or a state of inferiority, are certainly offensive and reprehensible, but they cannot be, in my opinion, translated in English as the N-word. It doesn't have the same historical weight as the N-word has here in the Deep South. Anti-Black racism in Tunisia is certainly crueler than racism against the Berbers or the blue people of the interior regions, but it is not Jim Crow laws. And if I am to translate the word Usif, for example, in English, I would just keep Usif. I will not translate it. It has, for me, no equivalent. The American concept of race cannot be uncritically applied to the North African context, where Blacks are part of the indigenous population and not necessarily descendants of slaves, as the case is in the US. In fact, in the Maghreb, and to the best of my knowledge, there have been no laws that targeted Black people as inferior human beings. Dehumanization and legal inferiority functions on account of sex, not race. It is women in North Africa who are constructed as second-class citizens in the name of the sacred. It is not men. There is no legal inferiority of Black citizens, but there is legal inferiority of Muslim women and of women in the case of the Maghreb. In addition, how does one's location change one's perception of race? Although I'm racialized as Muslim and Arab in the US media, I'm ironically Caucasian in the US census. Not African American, even though I am from Africa and I am now, I have American citizenship. It's not, I don't have that status. Even more ironical is the fact that when Black Tunisians or Afro-Tunisians move to the United States, they are classified as Caucasians. Having read Léopold Sédar Senghor's poem, L'Homme de Couleur, I always smile when I'm referred to in academic circles as a faculty of color. Being a multilingual immigrant, people of color and colored people mean the same thing to me. As we say in Arabic, Haj Musa or Musa al-Haj, it's the same thing. Both definitions were not chosen by me, and they were imposed on me. The second thing besides race I would like to focus on is the translation of the cause of racism in Tunisia. And this is where we need more collaboration to work more on the causes of racism. But I find dissatisfaction with the current explanations that emerged after the revolution. Anti-Black racism against Black Tunisians and sub-Saharan African immigrants, for example, is a big problem that cannot be denied today. Tunisian Black activists in the post-revolution are often accused of betraying the nation and of conspiring with foreign powers to destroy the nation, which is, by the way, the same accusation held against feminists of all political affiliation. While I wholeheartedly support the civil rights of Black Tunisians and after the revolution, I do have concerns with the explanations they provide for the existence of racism in Tunisia, especially when they write in English. Both Houdam Zioudet and Afifa Latifi, for example, explain the existence of anti-Black racism by Bourguiba's secularization and homogenization project. The choice to focus only on post-independence is a strategic choice to indict the post-colonial nation state without delving into a thoughtful discussion about structural or systemic racism in Muslim societies, not just Tunisia. By making Bourguiba the source of anti-Black racism in Tunisia, as Meha Abdelhamid argues in an article on the Black activist Marzouk, he's the guy that Bourguiba put in Manouba mental asylum for 30 years because he wanted to create a Black party in Tunisia. But it is not Bourguiba's secularism that is behind his racism. And in fact, in dismissing Tunisian racism on the imported secularism from France, she is in fact reproducing the Islamocentric narrative, which denies the existence of racism among Muslims. We have no racism in Islam. Racism comes from the West. God said all people are equal. End of discussion. It's not clear how Ibn Khaldun and Bourguiba's French education introduced anti-Black racism in Tunisia, while on the apparel of women, the infamous misogynistic treatise of the Latinized Berber Tertullien, 155 to 20 AD, in which he was cursing Tunisian women who straightened their hair and dyed it with saffron because they were ashamed of their nation, or huwiya, to use modern terminology. So I would say, contrary to what Fanon argues in Black Skin and White Masks, this idea of internalized racism did not start with the French colonial encounter. We find it as early as the Roman conquest of Tunisia. My third point is about revisiting Afro-Arab theories of race through the lens of intersectional feminist translation. Why take the American race model as an example to emulate in Tunisia, while it has obviously failed in the US, as seen in the murder of George Floyd, the prison system and poverty, and the high percentage of mortality in the pandemic among African Americans? Hyphenated identities are certainly beautiful in comparison with French blind policies when it comes to race, but it's not the racial utopia Black Tunisian activists presented when they opposed it to France or Tunisia. I suggest, in particular, we revisit Al-Jahal's Abbasid treatise on Blackness in The Boasting of Blacks over Whites, which has been mistranslated sometimes as the glory of the Black race. Actually, he doesn't call it the Black race in Arabic. In Simon Starr's translation, it is full of errors, and in the passages which show female eloquence, especially Black women eloquence, he just does not translate them. He just deletes them. And this is the passage, for example, which doesn't get translated into English. And And I found it with another earlier translation by Khalidi, but it has never been published into book, but it's a very good translation. This is the passage about Black female eloquence that has been deleted from the English translation. While female eloquence was constructed as sexy in medieval Abbasid imaginary, it was an indecent behavior that must remain hidden according to this 20th century African-American male translator. And I quote the passage that I'm using from Khalidi, not Stars. Shaddad al-Harithi, an eloquent and scholarly man, said, I asked the Black slave girl in the desert, to whom do you belong, Black woman? To the master of city folk, oh, bold one, she replied. Are you not Black? I asked. Are you not bold? She answered. How annoyed you are by the truth, I retorted. It is you the truth has annoyed, she said. Do not be insolent if you want to be respected, and to desist altogether would be more seemly. All of this passage is gone in the English translation. Despite its internalization and repackaging of medieval anti-Black racism, Al-Jahaz's treatise must be revisited to fill the gap of Afro-Arab scholars who theorized Blackness. Even Stephen King, in his 2019 article, Black Arabs and African Migrants Between Slavery and Racism in North Africa, uses as authority on the subject Bernard Lewis and ignores the writings of translated Afro-Arab writers about racism and slavery in the Arab world. Al-Jahaz's definition of whiteness and Blackness showed that race is a socially, historically, and also a political, it's a social, historical, and political signifier. They say, and I quote, Black men are more numerous than white. Whites can count their own Al-Faris, Jibel, Khurasan, the Byzantines, Slav, Franks, and Avars, and little else beyond these. On the other hand, the Blacks can count the Arabs, the Zanj and the Abyssinians, the Fazan, the Berber, the Copts, the Nubians, the Ghawa and the Mrawa, the Sind and the Hind, the Qamar, the Daibur, China, and Mason. So all the people that we refer to these days as color, people of color, he defines them as Black. In this medieval Abbasid theory of human races, informed, of course, by Galen's theory that environment affects the moral and intellectual characteristics of the human species, the borders of Blackness and whiteness were much broader than the way we are using them today. For him, whites included Europeans, Byzantines, Turks, and Persians, while Blacks included all people of color, Blacks, Arabs, Chinese, South Asians, Berbers, etc. Heavily involved in the Shu'ubiyya literature, Al-Jahaz sees himself with more than one veil, to borrow Du Bois' metaphor of the double consciousness of the Negro. Al-Jahaz has a quadruple consciousness as Black, as Arab, as opposed to the white Persians, his Muslim, and as a male. All these different parts of his identity are always at war with one another. As a Black man, he praises Abraha's courage when he launched his attack against Mecca in the year of the elephant. Unlike Arabs, he constructs Muhammad as a Black man because he descends from Ishmael, the son of the Egyptian slave Hagar. As an Arab man, he shifts the blame for the existence of racism in Abbasid Baghdad on the white Turks and Persians. As the case of Al-Jahaz's treaty shows, intersectionality is not just between whites and colored people, meaning non-whites. It is within oneself, between the degrees of whiteness and the degrees of Blackness, between these contradictory and complex identities that form one's subjectivity. My last comment would be on the hijacking of international, I would say, sorry, that's a different argument. It seems to me that there is a certain hijacking of international feminism in the, after 2011. I would like to speak, instead of saying intersectional feminism came in after 2011, I would rather say it's more accurate to say it is the second wave of international feminist translation of that came after 2011. The intersectional feminism did not start in Tunisia with the 2011 revolution, as many argue today, as evidenced in Olfa Youssef's book that appeared in 2007. It's seen also in Salwa bin Zahra's scholarship and articles on race and disability. So many people worked on that. In the case of post-revolutionary Tunisia, intersectional feminism has been hijacked to serve narrow, conservative, local political agendas in the name of democracy, diversity, and inclusion. Rather than decenter the US frameworks of race, racism, and Blackness, or develop new theories how race intersects with other identities like gender, sexuality, ability, religion, and age, intersectional feminism in Tunisia was co-opted and turned into a tool to deny women equal citizenship on the ground of social and regional justice, and reinforcement also Islamist conservative mores, which dismiss any movement for gender justice and individual liberties as foreign conspiracy instigated by imperial, secular, and racist France. For some reason, imperial Anglophone hegemony coming from UK or USA is not on their radar. Intersectional feminism, and especially that emerged with Black feminism, has been translated in the Anglophone world in particular as the poster child of Islamist democracy in opposition to the old state feminism of Bourgeois, which was anti-Islam and anti-Black. For example, another deputy, Jamila Debesh Xixi, is often presented as the symbol of racial diversity and inclusion within another party. Maha Abdul Hamid presents her as the only Black woman who entered politics in the history of Tunisia, but she conceals the existence of Black women activists on the left, such as the famous reporter and syndicalist Najiba Hamrouni, or Samira Trablsi from the Jabha party. Some Black feminists, like the novelist Fathiya Dabesh, have denounced this hijacking of their cause by conservative political forces and argued that the election of a Black woman deputy at the head of an Islamist list is a political tool to win the Black vote in the South. She's a token of diversity, not diversity. And so we have to be careful about how our rights, our civil rights are being used and deployed overseas. Another disturbing silence in the intersectional feminism championed by Abdel Hamid is that the silence, even when they say it is the Bourguiba who created, anti-Black racism, the source of racism against Black in Tunisia, granted, he did it. But why don't you say anything about Article 1 of the 2014 Constitution, which defines Tunisia's post-revolutionary identity as Arabo-Islamic only? Article 1, Tunisia is a free, independent, sovereign state. Its religion is Islam, its language Arabic, and its system is Republican. In the new constitution, the word Arabo-Islamic is mentioned 7 times, as neither Black Tunisians nor Berbers are recognized as Tunisians in the new constitution. I would like to argue that it is self-imposed censorship which explains the silence of intersectional Tunisian Black feminists over Article 1 of the Constitution. There has been already, so many backlash after the 2018 law criminalizing discrimination or hate speech against the Blacks. On the contrary, the law made people more aggressive towards Black Tunisians. There is more hate speech on social media. So I guess they are choosing their battles. So there are things that they are not critique. Perhaps it is even from my privilege as a non-Black, as a brownish Tunisian, to bring up the issue of racism in Article 1 of the Constitution, because I understand it's a question of positionality. In conclusion, I would like to open the door for more collaboration South-South. Being located in Alabama, I was thrilled to read Sylviane Diouf's Dreams of Africa in Alabama, the slave ship Clotilda, and the story of the last Africans brought to America. And I discovered so many Arabic and Muslim names in the which is, for me, it opens a new field of study. There are now about 100 slave narratives in Arabic that exist in different libraries of North and South America, and they badly need literary and linguistic analysis and also translation. Because the early American scholars and Egyptian diplomats in the 19th century, when they read them, they dismissed them as poor writing by Southern Negroes. There was no interest in studying them. As Judy Ronakld argues in Disinforming the American Canon, many of these manuscripts were written in Fulani Arabic. It's a whole dialect. The differences are not grammatical mistakes, as the Egyptian diplomat said in the 19th century. These translations are important because they are an integral part of the historical justice research project that was recently started here in particular in Alabama. The Library of Timbuktu has thousands of manuscripts that have never been studied because of racial prejudice. I encourage young scholars from North Africa to work together with West African scholars on studying and saving these manuscripts. I also encourage more scholars, more collaboration between African American scholars and between Arabic scholars, the Arabic language scholars, to work together on translating and on analyzing these texts, because if we don't do it, they're going to be lost. Finally, I would like to wrap up my talk by going back to Olga's fascinating argument 2 weeks ago about location and translation. In her 2019 superb novel, Melanin, it is by Fathia Dabesh, she's a Black Tunisian writing and working in France, but she writes in Arabic. And I love the book because it is for me a novel. It's a novel against the illusion of fixed identities, including both the Afro-Arab identities and Arabo-Islamic identities. Fathia Dabesh writes in her preface, and that's my translation, the book is being translated, it's not out yet. This investigation is not from she who is coming from the deserts carrying her name and exile. It is not a personal biography, but the biography of us all. It is the biography of all those history rolled from the sun to the snow or vice versa, and also to the others who, seduced by the lure of home, believe that the uprooted are only those coming from over there. And thank you for attending this lecture.
Thank you so much, Lamia, for this fascinating talk, which took us to so many areas, so many fields and so many things that I have probably a lot of people like me who are in the West, who are in academia, in Western academia, and who are also part of who come from the global South, and who have always questioned their positionality and how they write and what they write, and how to avoid being like native informants, how to do research without compromising their integrity, and so on. I think I think saying that the talk is, and the book and the preface in particular, is provocative and insightful. Definitely provocative. I think I will say to Dr. Douja Mamlouk, who just joined us, that probably it's an understatement. And I'm sure we will have a lot of, we will, now I'll give the opportunity to Professor Ronakld Judy to say more and to give us more insightful thoughts about the topic that you have raised. So now the floor is yours, Professor Judy.
Thank you, Anissa. I want to first begin by thanking Anissa for organizing this series. I've had the good fortune to work with her in this area of Muslim feminist translation. I worked with her to put together what was really a groundbreaking issue for the journal Boundary 2 that I'm on the editorial board of, and that was her huge project on the Black Decade in Algeria, in which she brought together women from different aspects, those who suffered the sexual violence, in communication with artists, and then in communication with analysts, practicing what Castro would have characterized as a kind of feminist translation. And we were able to publish that on the blog for the journal, which is called B2O, and we're able to do it simultaneously in all 3 languages, which is no mean feat, so that each article appears in all 3 languages, so as we could reach people who were speaking French, Arabic, and English. I want to also Dr. Benyoussef, Professor Benyoussef, for this work of translation, which is truly amazing, and I will have some very specific questions around theory in a minute, if you'll permit me. And also for a talk that was, as Dr. Daoudi put it, really provocative. That is to say, provocative to thinking, not provocative as scam. I'm rather interested in this concept of feminist translation as Olga Castro has elaborated it, because she's the one who edited that volume of feminist translation studies. But in a subsequent interview, she tried to give a clear sense of what it was doing. And I think this sense applies to your translation of Hirat Muslim, or Hirat Muslima. And that is, if we accept that feminism as a social political struggle, has a particular aim, and that aim is to challenge and disrupt gender power relations, as well as other relations of power that intersect with gender. And this is a kind of absolutely revolutionary approach. And that I would say, to paraphrase the Kondahi River Collective, that there can be no liberation until there is truly a liberation of women. And of course, they're talking in that instance as Black women, and they're saying that what happens to us happens to everyone. So Castro continues then to say that feminist translation, in that vein, being feminist, is a political meaning-making praxis. A political meaning-making praxis that challenges hegemonic, and I take her to mean it in Gramsci's sense of hegemony, and that is the sense in which a particular class's view of the reality of the cosmos becomes normative for everyone. It challenges hegemonic power relations in any and every aspect of translation. Right? And this feminist perspective to translation involves identifying where different mechanisms of gender discrimination lie in translation and disclosing the ideological values behind them as a first step to proposing alternatives for gender equality. Now, I want to suggest, when I begin to ask some specific questions about your work, that your talk was indeed a performance of that. And what I mean is the ways in which you're opening up with explaining the politics behind your wanting to translate Olfa Youssef's work, and those politics in terms of intervening in a very particular configuration of gender that disregards intersectionality around a number of geographical as well as social spaces opened up then into a reimagining of fundamental social categories, to wit, race, right? And of course, you're quite accurate statement in terms of the issues of law, where I have a slightly different understanding. The phrase "tafrika unsariya," right, which often gets mean racism, really has to do with a kind of chauvinism, which is why in Arabic you can refer to all kinds of chauvinisms, texts, etc., etc. And of course, what it has in common with the modern European conceptualization is not the scientific organization of the species, but the implicit presumption that there is a norm that everything else is derived from, and that norm is somehow what the 17th century Europeans will call man. And of course, in the Islamic context, which we share in common, there is again that presumption of man. One of the things that Olfa Youssef points out quite nicely in looking at the Mus'haf, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, almost always the mukhatab is the man, right? The addressee is the man, and especially on questions having to do with Anissa, with women. Right? So, tafrika unsariya in that sense is also then presupposing a normative that is the man. And as you point out quite nicely, in the Islamic context, in terms of legality, laws, right, practice laws, going back more than a millennia, it is the female who is categorized in law as something less, right? And as Olfa Youssef, I have to keep remember it's Lamia Benyoussef translating.
I have the same.
On his, this is wonderful. This. Well, I had anyways, as indeed she points out, that the woman is constituted as property. When you're looking at the perplexity of Daoudi. Beautiful. So you're practicing this concept in the talk very nicely. Having marked that, I had a few questions about some of the theory that you use, and they're questions that have to do with choices you make in translation. And then I have, finally, I'll have, if time permits, a rather pedestrian question about publishing and production. And this is going to do with a pet peeve I have of what happens to Arabic terms in English language presses, how things get scrambled. So I noticed that there's really some interesting things that you do. And I'll cover this generally by having us remember that the Quran, which is the text that Youssef is attending to, is a figural text. Right? The ponderous of it is figural language that was impenetrable. And it's that poetic aspect of it that led to the sciences of language. Ilm al-Mu'jam to Ilm al-Rijal to informing even Nahu. But I noticed that you used a very specific epigraph, which she uses at the beginning of the first chapter of her book, right?
Yes.
From Al-Imran. ما يعلم تعويله إلا الله. You don't translate. You do two things, right? First thing is, and I'll give a translation for those who don't speak Arabic in a minute, is you put it on the cover of the book, untranslated, right? Above the image of the woman's hand with the open Quran. Yeah, if we could zoom in on that, it's untranslated, right? And then after you go through the title page, in the table of contents, you kind of throw it in there, almost as if it were a dedication page, just placing it from where it is in the original Arabic, which is the opening page of the first chapter, where it functions as an epigraph. That's deliberate. And I'm wondering if that's not part of what Castro's talking about in terms of the kind of choices made.
Yes, that's my personal choice to put it on the cover, because for me, that's the most important verse.
Yeah.
That summarizes the book. That's why I put it in the on the cover.
Don't know. No one knows its interpretation.
Yeah. And
Ta'wil is an interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Here, that I struggled a lot. I'm happy you picked that verse. I struggled a lot with that verse, and I read so many translations. And then in the beginning, when my first draft, I wrote only God. Only God knows its meaning. And then when I went back, I said, no. Even God interprets things.
Yes.
He doesn't. He, like, the original meaning escapes even the Almighty. He's just interpreting, and I found that very fascinating. And I said, no. My first reading was a mistranslation. So, and I went back and even God interprets. So even if the original meaning is lost to the Creator himself, then who are we to make all of these laws that, so that's my point. That's why I put it there. Then who are we to make all of this and speak on his behalf?
Which is precisely the question, right? Because if you look at Tabari, for example, in his exegesis, his tafsir, on that passage, this is again from the Quran, Al-Imran. It's important. Ma ya'lam, right? Nobody knows. What's the object of ilm here? Ta'wil. Nobody knows ta'wilahu. Nobody knows its interpretation. Which of course then puts the issue of the authoritative value of any human interpretation in doubt. In other words, it makes interpretation completely open, thereby placing a certain authority on the part of the interpreter, but not an absolute one. Right? In the context of a book like this, where the author is departing in a radical way from the long tradition of tafsir, in a radical way, right? Not just being a woman, but then also deploying certain resources of language and of psychoanalysis to the sacred text. That epigraph is a very powerful. It's that challenge. It's a feminist challenge. In that same vein, there's a passage that you have, which is from, I believe, page 74 of the Arabic text.
Sorry, I don't have them here. Okay.
That's okay, I do. and it's when you're quoting Ibn Arabi on page 57 of your text, right? And the English that you give is the argument that the two spouses sexually enjoy each other, then they are equal in the marriage contract, is erroneous. For the dowry requirement gives the husband authority over the woman. And because of what he paid to her in return, when he comes down unto her, he does it as a master would unto a slave. Now, of course, you italicize that last passage, and rightly so, because Olfa italicizes it. But you make a very specific choice in translation, right? Because what reads as ويطير معها مرتلة الملك من ملوك ومن عفوا من مملوك right? You take that word مملوك, which of course we know if we look at al-Wasit or Lisan al-Arab, is raqiq. And you translate it as slave, which of course in English has a very particular register.
Yeah. Right?
Because of course we know that, Mamelouk, forgive me, Doja. but Mamelouk has a very interesting history, and in the moment Ibn al-Arabi is writing, it's a term that you're most likely to find in reference to women. It's very important in terms of Olfa's argument. But even in the Ottoman period, it's a term that will have a non-racial designation, right? But a very Islamic designation in terms of relationships of human ownership. One of the things that Olfa talks about comes peculiar to a certain medieval conceptualization. So that choice of the word slave really intrigued me. And again, is it one of these moments where you're doing a particular kind of feminist discourse? I suspect so, given what you said in your talk, where you made the connection.
Yeah, and consciously, that's the feminist speaking through the translation. Yeah.
But then that's very interesting in light of your talk, because then you're very consciously drawing a particular kind of parallel structure between the racial slavery of Western modernity and the gendered slavery of Islam.
Absolutely. That's
Well,
that's for me,
more of an answer.
yeah, we agree. I mean, there is not I mean, I really see that in the history of the Arab world, when it comes to slavery, we enslaved both blacks and whites and all kinds of people, even the Berbers, everybody could be enslaved. And there was no code. We didn't have things like the French black codes or the Jim Crow. Those did not exist, but we did have all of the laws, that are making women, how do you say, dehumanizing women or making her minors. This is all of these texts, the Islamic jurisprudence was all of these years for about, I don't know, more than 1,000 years, they have been, writing philosophical treatises on the legal subordination of women. To this day, if you read certain texts written, the 20th century, we are still seen as just sexual creatures. We are not seen, as how do you say, political leaders. To this day, we are not seen as equal citizens.
In fact, I don't know if I could just jump in, just so that I don't want to miss the section on the slavery, as well as what Olfa Youssef herself says when referring to when she was asked about the inheritance law. When she was asked, when she was told that these are the words of God and there's nothing we can do about it, the verse is very clear. She defended her point by saying, well, the same thing applies to the slavery law. It has been abolished. So when, at least here, she's talking about the laws, the Tunisian law, and she said, it has been abolished. Why can't we do the same thing with the inheritance law? Just I'm interested, I'm interested in your interpretation of linking the socio-economic side with the legal side, and I don't know if you could say something about it. I just wanted the discussion to be linked to other aspects as well.
I would say the reason why I think Olfa Youssef uses makes analogy with slavery is that because those who oppose gender equality in inheritance, they say the Quran is clear. It cannot be changed. That's what God says. Even though the Quran, and there are other verses where the women inherit the same as the men, but it is the verse of inequality that became the only meaning God had in mind. All of the others are irrelevant. So so because they say the text is clear, there is no room for interpretation, and then she uses slavery. Well, we the Quran is also clear. You can have 3, 4, and 4,
Yeah.
and also what your right hand possesses.
Women and
women. So there are slaves. So why did we, why are we now whitewashing our history with slavery and saying, no, Islam was against slavery? Sorry, but it is in the Quran.
Exactly.
Why can we now, nobody can talk about, can defend slavery openly, at least. Nobody can defend slavery, and they say the Quran doesn't allow slavery. And all of a sudden, but then the Quran is very clear when it comes to inequality. Inequality is the essence of Islam. You can change anything except gender inequality. That's the true meaning of Islam as it is being understood, unfortunately, by many Muslims, including women. And I would like to add to what you said, Anissa, the analogy between women's rights and slavery did not start by Olfa Youssef. The first time I see it was actually in Tahir Haddad's Our Woman in the Society and the Sharia Law, where he says, one of the first things, now we remember Haddad only as the one who talked about the need to, to educate women, and he removal of the veil, he ended polygamy. But what we don't want to acknowledge, that is the real, I would say, cause for the, the fatwa against Haddad, is that he called for gender equality in inheritance. And that's why there were so many scholars who wrote, they said that he was a kafir, that he lost his job, and he died a poor man, and he died of a heart attack in 34. This is for me the unspoken in the story, in the controversy of Tahir al-Haddad. He is a syndicalist, and because of his syndicalist background, he saw that gender poverty is also caused by gender inequality.
Yeah,
and you cannot have and fight colonialism if women do not inherit anything. And even the so-called half that the Almighty gave us, we actually never receive it. Okay, so in theory we get the half, but we actually get nothing. Okay. So now in I think 2018, when we had the Colib, the project to bring gender of individual liberties, and also introducing gender equality inheritance, all of a sudden, all of them, they said, gender equality, we Tunisians do not have French fathers to tell us what to do. Gender inequality is a foreign Zionist conspiracy to destroy Islam and Arabitude. Well, it was not imposed by the EU. It was not imposed by the International Monetary Fund. They can care less about my rights as a Muslim woman. It is Muslim women, and even the Muslim men, as early as 1930, were fighting for the economic rights of Muslim women. It is not a foreign conspiracy, and it has nothing to do with Zionism. So this is to discredit Muslim women who want full citizenship. They say your economic rights are against my identity, is against Islam, and you are working for forces, outside the nation.
Sure. Well, as I told you, it's really provocative. I wanted to go back to Professor Judy. If you could probably continue, I just wanted, that was just an interruption. So please go ahead.
Thank you. And it's an important interruption. And another aspect of the point that you made, I'm reminded of a debate between Talal Asad,
yes,
senator of post-secularism, and Abdullah Naim, the protege of Taha, at CUNY, City University of New York. I believe the year was 2015, 2016. And at stake in the debate, the question of slavery. And this bears on the connection you're making, Anissa, because the issue of slavery was always a challenge to Islam's claim of being able to modernize. And Naim, who's a much better reader of Quran than Al-Asad, pointed out that the abolition of slavery was not a function of Sharia. That the traditional discourse of Sharia and the Quran condoned slavery. And if we had not departed from those discourses in establishing our social order, there would still be slavery. So the celebration you want to make about slavery having been abolished in the Muslim world, it was not abolished based upon Muslim resources. And of course, Naim famously is a proponent of secularism, or Risala Athani. I think that the issue of women's rights and gender equality also poses a question to Islam's capacity of modernization. And hence the remark that Youssef makes in the first Perplexity around the hair is on the point. You want to be modern? Well, if you could be modern by getting rid of slavery, which involves stepping outside of the text, then you need to get rid of gender. They're fundamentally bound in this notion of what is possible in just society. So it wasn't an interruption at all. In fact,
Of course not.
it was on point to what I was talking about and wanted to go to with the next question. But I think we've lost Dr. Benyoussef.
I think we lost Lamia.
We lost. I hear you.
You can hear
Can
us.
you hear me?
Yeah. What about you?
Okay, I can hear you.
What about the
So
yeah.
if I may be permitted, I had a couple of more questions
Sure,
about
please do. Yeah, please do.
what I
Maybe
thought.
if we take one at a time, one, and then we move to another, and then we come back to you.
Okay.
Please.
I discerned as, and apparently correctly so, were choices of feminist choices in translation. And that has to do with the way you translate the passage from I want to give citation from a Tabari, Ahkam al-Bayan. And that passage appears on page 90 in the Arabic text and page 60 in your translation. And you give the passage as follows: if a slave woman is to be sold and she has a spouse, her master is most deserving of her vagina. Now that struck me, of course, because Youssef is quoting Tabari, and Tabari says, "Sayadha ahaq bibada." Why did you say vagina?
I didn't hear well. I got cut off several times. Could you please repeat?
Where Tabari says bibadiha.
Is it biba'dhiha? Yeah.
No.
Bibad.
Bibadaha, forgive me. Bibadaha. Da, dod, ain, ha.
Bibadiha.
Biba'dhiha, is it? Okay.
When Tabari says bibadiha, ahaq bibadiha, you say her vagina.
Ah.
Oh, I have asked Olfa. I have asked Olfa. Some of these I asked Olfa Youssef what certain words mean, and that's the explanation she gave me. And I worked closely with Olfa Youssef.
So, what was her thinking behind turning ahaq bibadiha into deserving of her vagina?
Well, I trusted the original author. You know, that I asked her what he means bibadiha, and that's what she said. So, what does it mean according to you?
Well, no, I found it rather striking and important that term vagina keeps being used over and over again in the translation.
What page is that? I don't have to look at it now. Sorry. What is what page 90 you said?
Page 90 in her text.
In her text.
Page
Okay.
91 in her text.
I will check it.
And
get back to you. Okay.
and 60 in your text. No, my question is, I guess I'm not being clear. It's not a challenge question. I found that a very interesting translation. Right?
In fact, probably
in the Arabic, she doesn't have a gloss. She doesn't a Tabri's classical euphemism, and she definitely doesn't use you know,
the words
muhabbat, for example. Right? And yet its occurrence throughout the text, especially in the translation, foregrounds what I think is a feminist aspect in the point she's making about rights and embodiment. Right? That indeed the female body is not a bad thing in and of itself. And that much of the claim of property, going back to her perplexity about dowry, seems to treat the female body as only being a bearer of the vagina uniquely, as if it was some sort of, I don't know, disarticulated thing. So I was wondering if indeed in your discussions with her and in the choice of this translation, you weren't thinking again about what as I'm reading it, is really an effective intervention.
I find that too, yeah.
Talking about vaginas here, let's get away from euphemism.
Honestly, when I was translating, I wasn't thinking of feminist translation. I didn't even know what a feminist translation was. Yeah, you know, as I said earlier, my introduction to translation studies came after I translated the book. I don't know, even afterwards, when Anissa said, what are the strategies that feminist translation, you know, feminist translators do, is that they write a preface. And I said, I didn't even know that was a feminist strategy. I just thought that's the right thing to do, the logical thing to do. So, you know, I didn't think, the only thing I had in mind when I was translating is to be as close as possible to Olfa's reading of the tradition and of the Quran. That's the only thing I remember I was very careful about, as close as I could to her feminist reading. She was translating the Quran in the feminist way, and I was retranslating it into Arabic. That's what I wanted to do.
In the feminist way.
That's the only, but without thinking of feminist translation. It's just accuracy to the original text. Even then later I discovered that actually feminists are not close to the original text. You have room for change, but that's what I was trying to do with the text.
And I think you did the right thing, actually. You did it brilliantly. Yeah. The fact that you stress, for me, as Ronald has just said, making the stressing on the point of property, and also bath means like an aspect of the body on the vagina, and also like as if you're reducing women to just the vagina. That in itself, just using the words, makes it more, I don't think there is any other feminist way of presenting that than this one. And it's despite the fact that I'm sure you say, while you're doing, you might not be aware of the theories of translation, feminist translation theory. However, your specialism in gender studies definitely is seen in your translation. And I just wanted actually to show the book again. This is the book, and again I cannot probably this verse is what summarizes this particular book. And if there is anything from our part to decolonize knowledge, this session in itself, the fact that we have someone in Islamic studies, someone in talking about theory, talking about translation, talking about critiquing knowledge production from our regions by us is in itself, I think, an opportunity that is we don't see. I hope we have more of these sessions. I hope we have more. I hope we can engage with religious men, with scholars and so on, as much as we engage with the academics as we're doing tonight. I think we have, I thought we have Douja Mamlouk who raised her hand earlier, and then we go back to.
I did, but it's okay, since I think I don't want to take up time for other people if they want to ask questions.
And then we'll come back to you.
So if you have time, but you don't have to, because I can always talk to Lamia in person.
Sure, we'll have Dr. Ruth Abu Rashid, and thank you so much for being with us throughout these sessions. Thank you. Please go ahead, Ruth.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. I just had a question, because I was really interested in when you were talking, how you linked, I mean, your talk was amazing, really insightful. I think we've all learned so many things in such a short period of time, and you summarized it beautifully and very eloquently. And, I can't thank you enough for it. My question was, you talked a little bit about the processes of the hegemonic process that you yourself faced as a translator and as an academic translating this book. And what you spoke about reminded me of, I suppose, what have been talked about, I suppose, by Marilyn Booth in the context of feminist translation, when she finds there seems to be a lot of neo-colonial East-West politics underpinning a lot of strategies of translation to make it acceptable for particular publics at certain times. For example, I think we remember Spivak, Gayatri Spivak has always spoken about how there's a pressure on women and men to produce translations that are easy to read for particular readerships at particular times. And what she's called for is, I suppose, what you've done is for intimate engagement, how to responsibly engage with the way a work has been written and published, to give a sense to she says, a clue to the gendered workings of a text. And the way that you summarize that, when you with the question about bod and why Olfa decided, whether you knew or not, that was her interpretation of the word vagina. That is part and parcel of engaging with and showing what sort of asymmetries of power exist across languages, translation, even understandings of our own bodies. The fact that you put the quote on the text, you're calling into question, even calling us to question what is a text in the first place. What is it that we're trying to do? What knowledge are we trying to communicate? I just wanted to ask you a little more about explain a little bit further when you were going through these processes of translation, talking with Olfa. How did you explain your praxis to the publishers in question? Because it's amazingly complex what you've done, very intricate, it's very powerful, it's provocative, it opens different ways of thinking. And I was wondering, how would the publishers, who are often very much, I suppose, more conservative, they're worried if they're going to get their book sales, they're worried what certain people will think, what certain reviewers will think. How did you negotiate that process with the publishers once you realized, agreed with Olfa, how you would translate this text?
To tell you the truth, I had over 40 rejections.
Wow.
Of that manuscript. And I was surprised that all the big universities who write about Islam didn't think that book was important to translate. And that I said, I will continue. I'm not, I started first, I translated only the beginning, the first part, and wrote the proposal. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna finish. And that was, and I finished all of it in spring and summer 2012. And at that year in spring, and I'm gonna, these are personal things, I had a lot of problems at work. And I felt the whole system was trying to make me lobotomized, I don't think, and they were giving me classes, deliberately retaliating, giving me classes where I could not generate knowledge. You see, all my, you have a tenure track faculty and you give my research areas to find, and I said, you know what? I will continue to think, and I took that book. And I started working on it. you know, and it is true, the feminist soul in the translation is not just against Islamic patriarchy. And I hope you got that. It is also against the academic patriarchy here that is seldom acknowledged outside the US. It is both. And that translation allowed me to survive that particular semester. You know, it is, translation is survival because it allows us to think, even though it's not my work, but at least, you know, you get it and you transmit, you know, the power, because because the whole system, you know, it's a kind of lobotomization, you know, when you get and you function only as a native informant. And that's why for me, it was, translation allowed me to move on and, you know, and overcome these personal hardships that I had at work at that particular semester. Oh, you cannot hear me?
No, we can.
Yes.
Carry on.
Yeah, no.
Yes, now we can see you. Oh.
Oh,
I don't know why it's changing. Okay.
oh,
Uh-oh.
it's gone again. Because it struck us very a bit, because the way when you explain that the way that you explain that gives a further paratext or even paratranslation to this, because it's something which is a very strong message for us all. Like, it's an often practice of many hegemonic systems of power to dismiss. Louise von Flotto uses the word Torchweigen. If you ignore something, it will go away, it will die. So and therefore we don't have to do anything against it, it will just go away by itself. And from your practice, what I understand, and it's not explicitly set out in intersectional feminist translation theory, but what you're teaching us, it's about prevailing and not giving up and refusing. And I like that term, lobotomization.
Yes, that's what it, It is, that translation for me is my response to 7 years of lobotomization. So, and that helped me move on in my, for me, it helped me survive the racism and sexism in American academia.
Yeah, and also the fact that it's going to be faced, you know, the fact the interpretations are going to be, it goes across, I think it cuts across, we talk about intersectional feminist translation, but also about intersecting hegemonies as well.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, Olfa, I wanted to ask as well, sorry to take the question, is how has she responded to the, you know, the reception of your book now it's published? How does she herself, what's her take on it now it's out and it's going to be translated?
I think this is her first book that was translated into English. I don't think if there is and then after this one, a year after this one, came the French translation. I don't know, I don't know, it's like the French, I don't know, the French translate only things once the Anglo-Saxons have valued, then they translate it into French. I don't know, but I thought it's interesting that the English translation came before the French one.
Yeah, it's quite unusual, because usually it's the French that goes, proceeds. There is, in fact, I wanted just also to say that it's part that Olfa Youssef is not the only one who is challenging and who is disputing and who is dismantling actually the patriarchal, the Arabo-Islamic stuff that are unspoken about, and that are there's a group of feminist academics in Tunisia. Among the group is Dr. or Professor Amel Grami, Naila Sellini, and and many more actually. Ben Slama, Raja Ben Slama, and they really are doing great work. They're doing great job, and they're not just challenging. They're putting actually their lives at risk. It's not like, it's not an easy matter for them, and it's something that they do on a daily basis. I know that I know that Professor Amel Grami teaches. I think she's the first. She's the one who has designed, and she runs the first gender studies MA. I think, and probably a PhD as well in Tunisia. she's the editor of the first book series called, book series Gender Studies by Dar al-Nashr, or publication, publishing house Al-Miskilani. So these are women who are doing so much, and of course the West wouldn't hear about them. They just want to hear women who are victims, who are, and you need to be in Afghanistan to be saved. You need to be in, exactly. You need to be poor, crying, waiting for their rescue. And in reality, we there is that question, like, do women need rescue? Do we really need rescue? Do we need this rescuing from this type of rescuing? We probably don't. And we engaging with what these women are doing in Tunisia, these scholars are doing in Tunisia, definitely is worth celebrating. And I have, if you don't mind me, I just wanted, there is here Muhammad Saleh Omri, who I think has a question, or yes, please unmute Muhammad Saleh. Can you unmute your maybe Dega, if you could unmute.
Okay, I unmuted myself.
Yeah.
I don't need a woman to unmute me. Sorry, I'm joking. So I just actually thank you, Lamia. It's a really eye opener, and you covered an amazing array of issues. I just wanted to raise one point. Actually, I don't want to raise it. I just want to go back to a point that you mentioned, but just maybe just expand on it just a little bit, in the form of a comment rather, and maybe a question too. This has to do with what let's say Western-based academia chooses to translate, but also not only academia, beyond academia. It is well and fine and nice to translate poetry or fiction. It is also acceptable to translate classical Arabic literature and classical Arabic religious texts and so on. But it has proven almost impossible to find translations, or to fund translations, or to support translations of other forms of knowledge produced in Arabic. And my view is not necessarily a question that has to do with women, or has to do with, it has to do with this idea that is so well entrenched that these cultures are studied within area studies, and they come to us, as Edward Said said a long time ago, as already read. They're not capable of producing fresh new knowledge about themselves, but they can produce creative writing, they can produce forms of art, they can produce classical, they have produced, it's a culture that was alive at a certain point and it died now, so let's translate it for those other purposes. It can produce some levels of religious knowledge and so on. So for me, it's more of this Olfa Youssef or other texts, particularly in the contemporary period, have to do with this. The idea is these will amount to a recognition that these cultures produce knowledge about themselves that is actually valid knowledge. Because the perception is the producer of knowledge is us, not them. And I think this is, for me, is a wider question than actually just pertaining to a text by women, or with women issues a part of it. Just a thought, Lamia. I would love to hear your reaction.
Yeah, they are. I think in one of the articles, if you want, I can send you the article. I participated in this conference, which is about African cultural production. And the thesis was that why are African writers based in the US more inclusive and more creative of, than those living in their countries? And I wrote a paper that, that was totally against these premises, the premise of the book, and I said, actually, no, they actually do create, they do create, they do have creative works, they do have philosophy, but we do not translate, okay? And actually, I would say it's in the West that African writers cannot be creative, because of the, how do you say, like the boundaries you cannot cross. If you look at the success of Grami, Ben Slema, Zainab Toujani, all of them are Arabic teachers. They are not Tai Chi and French. Usually they think feminism and secularism come from France. No. The biggest feminists in Tunisia these days are teaching in Arabic departments. They are not minions of France as they are being portrayed in the English press. Okay, and I would say, yeah, and I would like, and I think I get so frustrated when I see, like you said, that they translate only novels, or even the film, and it's only, I would say, even English positions. I am, because I'm from North Africa, I'm not allowed to be teaching in an English department. I can teach only Arabic, okay? But it's interesting that they give those teaching positions for people who are not qualified to do that. You see what I mean? When I read when I look at certain articles about Tunisian cinema, I start to avoid reading them. And I would say the translation, this is why it's better to have a South-South translation, work with Latin American, small publishers, translate our work. And I think we have to stop the hegemony and of big publishing corporations in the US, and I think that's when we can how do you say, like undermine the hegemony of knowledge. An example of this would be in Nigeria. They have their own presses. They have it's a everybody can publish, and everybody, there is this how do you say, like this rich cultural life, and that we do not have in the US. Everything is about the veil and about jihad and Islam. There is, for example, I wanted a few years ago to buy something I had a grant, and I want about environment, and I wanted to buy books about the Muslim and the Arab world. There is nothing, because not that there is nothing in Arabic, but nothing gets translated that I can teach here.
No, there was a moment before 9/11, 2001, when people in America were wonderfully ignorant of Islam. And it was a moment in which a good deal of this work could take place in the margins. But after September 11th, 2001, what Muhammad Salah talks about as terrorology takes in. And also apropos, Lamia, to your remarks, it's a process where Islam and the Islamic world becomes racialized. It becomes folded into the American categorization of people along racial lines. I'll accept your point that you were, let's say, jokingly, but seriously, the joke, as Jahri said, every joke is serious. Were a feminist translator of Ronakld Judy. What you perform, that was what I was trying to show in my questions, and Ruth's remarks got to the point. What you perform is really quite powerful. It's a performance of it. And indeed, as Anissa was pointing out, in your preface, you marked you put forward this work in its own terms, and you do it in a casual way. You're not didactic. you presume that there's a knowledge that has its own metrics, and that you're bringing that to bear, and that's how you contextualize Olfa's work. And Benjamin, talking about translation, had this concept of Wortleben, right? The Wortleben of a work of art. And that Wortleben, that worth, was not something that translation produced, but it was only translated because it already had that Wortleben. I'm trying to relate this to
Yes.
that there's a whole economy of thinking and of being in the world. I don't like the phrase knowledge production, that has its own metrics. And you present this book, Hirat Muslima, as an expression of that metrics. Its value is not in being translated because it's valuable. And that proposition means you have to take that knowledge in that world valuable. That's a significant contribution and intervention. You know, the occurrence of this book, and I hope that Lexington is doing a good job distributing it. I'd want to help in any way that I can to make sure it gets properly reviewed and distributed, because its presence, its performance is really quite significant. You've accomplished in good measure what you set out to do.
Okay, thank you.
It's actually, I feel like we all have this, it's a compromise that we always have to make. You either, for example, what you have to deal with in the US is not very different from what we have to deal with here in the UK. With the metrics that are put for our research, to categorize our research, we have this system, the research exercise, whereby whatever you write has to be read by your colleagues, and then your colleagues, and then it goes to the school level, university level, and so on. And those articles have metric. They have, for example, they need to read them through the to see their rigor and so on.
Yeah.
And they have like you can get a 3-star, 2-star, 4-star. So we either have to, you feel like sometimes that you want your story out there, you want your voice as an academic out there, and through your voice you're also giving and making other voices heard. So that is like something that we always have to balance. And sometimes you just feel like yes, I will do what I feel is right. Like, for example, the issue that I was the special issue I did with which Judy with Ronald has just talked about, has been, I had to juggle so many things. Either I go for the translation, which is time consuming, and but through that I make the voices of women, Algerian women, heard in the 3 languages, in the 3 working languages, or I will just concentrate and put all my efforts in one article that will meet the criteria of this research exercise. And of course, I went for the earlier, because I needed, because there isn't there aren't that many articles on women, rape, and so on in Algeria. It's something that is unspoken about. So what I liked about going back to Lamia's book, what I liked about it is that preface. That preface basically says so much, and it definitely puts you contextualized. In fact, I feel like you added a lot of value to the original work, because the original work I read it in Arabic, and I was, at that time, I was just interested to read about what she says about inheritance, something that I always have struggled with, and I always have not accepted. Like, my mind could not accept the fact that women get less. This injustice to me is, this injustice still is out there, and still unacceptable, and still needs to be tackled. So for me, that preface in itself added a lot of value to this translation. And if yes, you might say that you have not, you haven't been like, you haven't read the feminist translation theory, but you did it with, you performed it with, in really, really in a beautiful way. I wanted probably to go back now to maybe Ronald to see if he has anything else. And
No,
okay, we have, we'll probably come back to you later. We have Leo Andre Proctor, please. Maybe if you could unmute, please.
Yes, hello?
Hi, we can hear you, yeah.
Hi, Leo.
Hi, I have a question. Dr. Benyoussef, in your talk, you issued some challenges both towards academics in North and West Africa regarding what deserves attention, as well as challenges to the Western academics as to how we receive and engage with these ideas. And thinking about what Dr. Abu Rashid said about your work has really set up around a really kind of intimate and personable discourse. My question for Dr. Benyoussef or Dr. Judy or Dr. Daoudi is what would you like to see more of? Dr. Benyoussef, you've touched on this some, but what papers would you like to see published? What research projects? And then of course, what can students interested in these subjects look out for?
Well, Leo, I would like the new generation of Arabic students, whether they are, from North Africa or, those educated in the US or England, is to work on these manuscripts, just, retrieve them. We have about now 50,000 manuscripts out of 250 in the library of Timbuktu. The others were destroyed by Al-Qaeda. So we have only 50,000. We need to go, work with, West African scholars to, to keep, to work, to first save them and then translate them and analyze them. In Alabama, I am sure there are many places. If you look even at the, there are many manuscripts that are hidden somewhere. We are here. We have the historical justice initiative, and they have been looking at African American newspapers in the 19th century. Use your Arabic to figure out, tell the story of these slaves who came here and who spoke Arabic. You can guess that from their names, and you can guess that I'm sure there are so many manuscripts hidden somewhere. There is one recently found in the Jefferson Papers, and I think the book came out last spring. They found two manuscripts of two runaway slaves from Tennessee, and they were writing, the only thing they wrote is the Surah al-Falaq, so what does it mean if you read, if you give Surah al-Falaq to the Savior, somebody who is supposed, to help you? What does that mean? Does it mean it's the only thing you know how to write? Since you can write that, Surah al-Falaq, we use it, it's like looking for protection, hoping for a miracle. Somebody will read it and come to their rescue. Unfortunately, the translator and the message will not be transmitted until, maybe 20 years after Thomas Jefferson's death. So we have all of these texts that we don't know what to do. They are hidden. Some of it, if you read the book or you read Dr. Judy's book, there are, you can locate many of these manuscripts and you can work on them and produce knowledge or bring them back to life. All of these narratives that have been lost. Or work on mastering Fulani Arabic, for example.
I was going to ask, I was going to ask Ronald if he also contributes to the answer. We can't hear you. You're still on mute.
Slight adjustment. That is called the Ajmi. It's not really Arabic, but there's I like what Dr. Falloum, a Senegalese scholar who's doing a lot of the work on retaining both Arabic manuscripts, but also Ajami manuscripts. And he says this is an enriched Arabic, right? That within the Islamic sciences, recognize Ajami that exists in the East, things like Urdu, languages that as a result of the conquest acquire the Arabic script, but we disregard the African sphere, where those languages are still very much alive. It could be Fulani, it could be Hausa, it could be Mindig, it could be Wolof. And indeed, many of the Muslim slaves who were in this country, such as the one who I look at, who were literate both in an Ajami language and in Arabic. So my subject, Ben Ali, most of his document is in Arabic, but then there are significant sections that are in Fulani. And so we do need to have much more support in both attending to those documents, translating them, but again, following up on Muhammad Saleh's remark and on what I see Dr. Benyoussef's work does, to bring to the fore the conditions of possibility in which they were produced, that is to say, the knowledges. It's significant that those two slaves from Tennessee are using al-falaq, because it has to do with a very specific conceptualization of Islam at play in Senegambia, where they were from, which is not going to necessarily be identical to the Arabic. And that's part of the other issue that's at stake with these texts, and that is countering the story that's told both within the Western scholarship and also within the Islamic scholarship, that Africa was merely on the periphery, when in fact, Timbuktu was one of the principal nexuses of knowledge production, and still is. That's the important point. It still is, right? And so, yes, I agree with Dr. Benyoussef, Professor Benyoussef. We need to encourage young scholars to begin to think as comparativists, and to understand that the acquisition of languages also means opening up to certain structures of knowledge and attend to the politics of it. This is what I find most salutary about feminist translation, not as a theory, but as a praxis. And I would even say, listening to the exchange, particularly the last exchange between you, Lamia, and you, Anissa, what would be a wonderful thing to happen would be if the emerging Black studies would find a home in gender studies.
That's a brilliant idea, yeah? That's a great idea, actually.
Solid historical grounds, because of the intimate connection between that question of color and that question of gender. Right? So many of those who were, Mamalik were the women, right, who produced princes. The father's sperm, the opposite of the American discourse of one drop, right, made them Arab or whatever was the ruling dynasty. Right? So there's that intimate connection. You know? Just like in Morocco, you have the class called Dada, the great cooks, right? Or the Ganawa. Gender is there. You can't disarticulate gender from the question of Blackness in the Islamic context because of the structure of slavery around the status of the vagina. I really like that intervention. It was an intimate conversation with Olfa that generates a very powerful intervention that disrupts the Western perspective. Oh, a Muslim woman talking about vagina? No, wait, this is disturbing.
Yeah, and with Muslim also talking about homosexuality, particularly now, as if it has not been spoken about in the past, where in reality, when we read classical literature, it's full of that, and it was not really seen as a big taboo as it is now. And in fact, I wanted just to probably go back to this idea of collaborative work, of transnational research clusters that would go beyond global South and global North. This is actually the aim. When I started off this series, that was my aim. I wanted to have like a group of scholars that we all, I wanted us to be in conversation on topics that are close to heart, and on topics that we research and we work on. And definitely this has been a really engaging and a very fruitful experience. If you don't have, Lamia, probably I'll go back to you if you have anything to comment on, and after that we will just finish if there are no more questions. Or maybe I'll go back to you, Ronald, as well.
Before that concludes, I like to hear conclusion. I want to ask what was going to be my trivial question, right? And it's about production. I was really amazed at the consistency with which the Arabic text appears intact when it's in an English language sentence. Right? Even when I go through proofs over and over and over again and correct the tendency, because the programs that the typesetters use deal with sentence that's bidirectional, where I will correct, no, you can't flip it that way. Still, I will find occasions in the published work where the flipping has occurred. Now, part of it is conceptual. They look at the Arabic and it's just gobbledygook. There's devaluing of it, right? And in fact, some of the exchanges I had with the editors where I'd say, no, you've got it wrong. No, we haven't. I mean, they couldn't see that they had flipped it. And I'd have to take screenshots and see, here's what I sent you, here's what you did. Right? Let me explain in great detail, here's the character that you shifted that's not supposed to be there. Just to recognize it, to fix it. So I'm really interested to know how you navigated that problem.
Oh, that problem, the Arabic. What I did, and I had that problem, then there become, you just have, how do you say, like single letters or they are backwards. So what I did in this manuscript and other manuscripts, I would just give them PDF, and I give them this. And then I said, you need to find the right format. It has to look like this one.
I did the same thing with PDF, but it still goes through the process where it goes to the typesetter who's using a computer program that is structured in such a way that it can handle Chinese, but it can't handle Arabic. And it's specifically when you have a word that appears in an English language sentence. It's about the direction of the text, right? So even doing PDF, et cetera, it's really very frustrating.
In the past, I think the publishers had somebody computer expert and somebody who knows also Arabic. That's how they dealt with it. That somebody who knew Arabic, but in the beginning, I had to tell them this is not Arabic. And I, in the review process, I said, no, I don't want this to go out. Okay. And then sometimes I had even I don't know, sometimes when I write, I send the letter in, I'd say I submit a paper in, a Word format, and the letters, it's Arabic, I can see complete sentences, but when they put it in PDF, then it changes. And then you have nasty comments from reviewers and they say, Arabic, that's not how you write Arabic, as if I don't know, but it's, but then I learned I have to submit both the PDF and so that they know what I mean by these words. Because it changes, depends, I don't know. But now they are better, aren't they?
No. Edward Said wrote about this 25 years ago, and it's still a problem.
Wow.
Yeah. And my program, simple solutions. It takes some knowledge and some money to fix it.
That's it.
But probably anything from now on, anything that involves money is not allowed. That's probably the new reality that we have to get used to. Lamia, if you could probably comment, if you have any comment, please.
For collaboration, I would like to just not leave things that we share with one another what our students do with Arabic studies. These are ideas, and maybe we can use each other as resources for our students. Maybe we can invite each other, or to classes, or you know, just research. You can, I would, I mean, for me, this is a new field, translation studies, but I'm learning every day something new. And I'm also passing on that knowledge to the newer generation. And it would be wonderful if we could, all of us, work together to, to groom, the future, the younger scholars.
That would be great. And also, I don't know if I could also suggest, what I had in mind is a workshop where we could have our MA students like hands-on. The reason, the structure of the 4 sessions that I had, that I thought of, was to have 2 speakers who will give us the theory side and 2 speakers who will do the practice side. And you both, yourself and Ruth, did that beautifully. Ideally is to have like a workshop whereby we could have scholars, maybe writers if possible, and translators, and with our students, and if we could have like hands-on approach to feminist translation. That could be probably something that we could arrange. So if you allow me to just really thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lamia, for this really insightful and this excellent talk. Thank you, Professor Judy, for your contribution, and Al-Afu. Thank you, Ruth, for being with us throughout this month. And thank you for your contribution. Thank you I wanted to thank Olga as well as part of this group. And I really hope that we could meet up in other experiences and in other projects. Thank you to Dega for helping us, our IT expert. Without her, I don't think I would have been able to do anything of this complex nature of sorting out the Zoom as well as talking to the speakers. Also, I wanted to thank our also IT engineer, Lamine Bisker from Algeria, who has always also been there and has always such a wonderful, helpful guy. Thank you so much. And I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you so much. And صحة سحوركم.
Thank you for doing this.
العفو.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lamia. Thank you, everybody. Thanks. Bye-bye.